The night it happened, the soup was still warm on the stove, and the children were already in bed, and the house was so still I could hear the wick burning inside the oil lamp on the shelf. I had just set a pot in the drying rack when I said it, those 4 words that changed everything. Quietly, without anger, without any intention of starting a war, I said, "That is not right." 4 words, not a shout, not a threat, not a door slammed, not a single raised hand. Just 4 words spoken by a woman who, for one unguarded moment, forgot that she was not permitted to have a correct opinion inside her own kitchen. My husband Eli did not answer me. He set down his fork the way a man sets down something he no longer wishes to touch, and he looked past me, at the wall just above my left shoulder. The way you look when the person standing in front of you has already ceased to matter. And in that silence, I understood with a cold and sickening clarity exactly what I had just done. I want to tell you what happened next, because it answers the question in the title of this video, and the answer is something that took me years to say out loud. What Amish husbands are permitted to do when a wife speaks back is not one thing. It is a list, and I am going to read you every item on that list, because every single one of them happened to me, and not one of them was ever called what it actually was. But first, let me give you some context, because without the context, you cannot understand the weight of 4 words spoken over a cooling pot of soup. In Old Order Amish life, the structure of a marriage is not a matter of preference or personality. It is theology. It is the Ordnung, the code, the order of things as God designed them, and it goes like this: God, then bishop, then husband, then wife, then children. That is the ladder. A wife does not climb it. A wife stands at the bottom of it and holds it steady so that everyone above her can ascend. This is not something you are ever told directly, because it does not need to be said directly. You absorb it the way you absorb language itself, through watching and repetition, and the slow education of consequence. You watch your mother's eyes drop when your father enters the room. You watch your aunts at church serve from the left side and eat from what remains. You watch the older women at quilting bees speak in the carefully grammar of women who have learned to say what they mean without ever appearing to mean it. By the time you are a young wife yourself, the lesson is already in your body, in the particular way you phrase requests, in the instinct to soften every sentence that contains the word I, in the habit of waiting to speak until spoken to on anything that matters. So when I say that 4 words undid me, I need you to understand what I mean by undid. I do not mean I insulted him. I do not mean I was cruel or loud or reckless. I mean that I stated an opinion in my own voice without softening it first, and in doing so, I stepped off the bottom rung of the ladder, and the ladder shook, and the man at the top of it noticed. What followed was not a single event. It was a sequence, and the sequence is the answer to the question I titled this video. The first thing an Amish husband is permitted to do when a wife speaks back is go silent. Not the ordinary silence of a man who is tired or thinking, but a specific and instructional silence, a silence that is meant to teach. Eli did not speak to me that evening. He did not speak to me the next morning. He moved through our home like a man who had been asked to share a house with a stranger he had not chosen, looking through me at mealtimes, answering the children, and not my, placing objects near me without handing them to me, existing in a state of deliberate absence that was, I came to understand, one of the most accepted and unremarkable tools a husband had. In our community, we called it the cold shoulder. But that name makes it sound small, makes it sound like ordinary sulking between ordinary people. What it actually was a punishment with no announced end, administered without any rule or church law being broken, because the church did not prohibit a husband from being quiet. He was simply quiet for 9 days. The second thing he was permitted to do and did was limit where I could go. The quilting bee that Thursday, I could not attend. He said nothing directly. He simply said he needed me at home, and in our world, that sentence had no appeal. I stayed home. The following Sunday, when my cousin's family came through from their settlement 2 counties over, he to cousins, he told me we were not receiving visitors that week. And so I sat in the kitchen of the house where my cousins were not, and I pressed the words I wanted to say against the roof of my mouth until they dissolved. The third thing, and this is the one that I think English people who have never lived inside a closed community genuinely cannot picture, was the bishop's visit. Eli hitched the buggy on a Tuesday morning and drove to the bishop's house, and I stood at the window and watched him go. And I did not cry because I had no room left for crying. I had seen this happen to other women. Miriam Graber, whose husband said she had developed a proud tongue after she began keeping her own household accounts. Ruth Zook, who had refused to give away a quilt she had made in secret over 2 years, her only private thing. Anna Schlabach, who had simply told a neighbor that her husband sometimes made poor decisions, which was true, which everyone who knew her husband also knew to be true. Each of those women had received the bishop's visit. Each of those visits had ended with the woman in tears, and the bishop nodding in the kitchen, and his husband standing in the doorway with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose institution had shown up for him. I had brought food to 2 of those houses. I had sat across from those women and said nothing, because there was nothing to say inside a world that had already decided the verdict before the conversation began. When the bishop came to my house, he came alone in his heavy coat, with his particular kind of eyes that managed to look gentle and immovable at the same time. He sat across from me at my own table and drank from a cup I had filled, and he said to me, almost gently, that a wife who sets her own judgment above her husband's judgment sets her own judgment above God's. He said that what I had said in my kitchen was not merely a sentence. It was a posture. He said that Eli had reported a hardness growing in me, a stiffness, a coldness, and that these were not words a good husband used lightly. He said my duty was not to be right. My duty was to yield, and that yielding was not weakness, but the truest form of faith a woman could offer. I looked at the placemat on the table, the one that had been woven by my grandmother's hands decades before I was born, and I felt something move through me that I did not yet have a name for. I know the name now. I have known it for years. But in that kitchen, in that moment, I said what a woman says to a bishop in her own home when she has no other language available to her. I said, I will try to do better. The fourth thing he was permitted to do, which Eli used with precision and patience over the years that followed, was to control the money, not all at once. It was a gradual compression, like a door slowly closing, until one morning you realize you are standing in a room with no windows, and you cannot remember the last time anyone asked your opinion on what was purchased or when or why. I want to be clear about something, because this story is not a simple one, and I did not come from a simple world. There were good men in my community. There were husbands who argued with their wives in low voices and worked it out between themselves, who never sent a woman upstairs, never called the bishop, never administered silence like a sentence. My own grandfather was such a man, and I watched him love my grandmother with a plainness and a reliability that I still think about. The structure of the community permitted cruelty, but did not require it. And there were men who chose differently every day of their lives. But the permission was always there. That is what I need you to understand. The permission was always there, sitting quietly in the corner of every Amish marriage, waiting, and a wife never knew which kind of husband she had married until she said the wrong sentence. And by then she was already baptized, already a mother, already past the door she could have walked through without losing everything that had ever been her entire world. I stayed for 4 more years after that evening over the soup pot. I became, during those years, very skilled at disappearance. Not physical disappearance, but the kind where a person learns to press herself small enough to fit through whatever space is offered to her. The older women at church said I had matured. They said marriage had settled me. They did not know that what they were calling maturity was the slow erosion of the person I had been before I learned to be afraid of my own opinions. The morning I decided to leave, I was hanging wash on the line in the gray light before the house woke, Eli's shirts and dark trousers flapping in a cold wind, and I thought, very calmly, with no drama and no particular heat, I cannot do this for 30 more years. I left with my 2 children and 1 bag. I left with the help of a Mennonite woman whose name I will never say publicly because she still lives inside a community that would punish her for what she did for me. The shunning came within days. My mother did not return my letters. My sisters went quiet in the careful and terrible way that people go quiet when the community has spoken, and they cannot afford to be heard agreeing with you. I have rebuilt my life slowly in the years since, the way you rebuild anything that was taken apart, piece by piece, also piece by piece. My therapist once asked me to identify the moment the marriage ended, and I told her it was not the bishop, and it was not the cold shoulder, and it was not the money, and it was not even the leaving. It was the soup pot. It was the night I looked at my husband's face go still and understood that I lived in a world where 4 words, stated without malice or raised voice, could set into motion a machinery of correction that the entire community around me would call love. She said to me, not long after that, something I have carried with me every day since. A marriage in which one person is appointed to correct the other is not a marriage. It is a sentence being served. I do not hate the community I came from. The Amish gave me a sense of the sacred, a knowledge of work, a closeness with the physical world, a depth of belonging that I have never fully replaced and do not expect to. But there is no reading of scripture I have ever encountered that requires a grown woman to press 4 honest words back down her own throat because the man across the table from her has been told by his church that her voice is the problem. If you grew up somewhere that called your opinion pride and your disagreement sin, I want you to know that I see you. If you have ever swallowed a sentence so many times that the sentence became something you forgot you had, I want you to know that on the other side of that silence, there is still a voice. It is still yours. It was always yours. My name is Greta, and this is Plain Truth. Tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you. Tell me where you are watching from. I read all of them.